Well, when a 911 call comes in, dispatchers have to be ready at a moment's notice, but sometimes those calls are a dud. Carl Hensley looked at the numbers for Yakima last year to find out how many of those calls were false alarms and how often people didn't even know they made that call.
When dispatchers get the call,
911.
there's no time to waste.
We got to be ready to respond at all times. We have our gear ready, we're mentally ready, we're physically ready. So when the alarm goes off, we're ready to go and be moving out that door.
But when it's a false alarm, that makes things a little more difficult.
The frustrating part about a false alarm call for us is that we need to be ready to respond to the calls that we need to be there for. If we're tied up on a false alarm, it could affect our response time for a crew getting to a more important call.
Stacy Garcia has worked at Suncom Dispatch in Yakima for more than 12 years. She says in her time, she's heard plenty of false calls that have left her speechless.
Honestly, if you can think of it, we've probably heard it. So we get some really, really interesting things. Just, run-of-the-mill everyday things, and then others were like, can you believe this?
In 2013, there were more than 8,000 calls made to the Yakima Fire Department. 530 of those were false alarms, about 6%. Even though that number seems small, it's still a lot of work for dispatchers and fire crews.
A lot of times it just ends up being someone that sat on their phone and dialed a button and it's coming into us, but we always follow up on it.
And the common reason dispatchers say they get false alarm 911 calls is parents giving their old cell phones to their kids as a toy. They say to avoid any false calls, take the battery out of the phone. That way, when your kids press the buttons, they won't be making that false call to 911. And for dispatchers and emergency crews, that means they always have to be on their toes.
So we just make sure we're ready. When we do get there, if it's a false alarm, then we come back to the station, we regroup, and we're ready to respond on the next call.
But when it comes to calling 911, they say it's always better to be safe than sorry when you think there's an emergency. In Yakima, Carl Hensley, NBC, right now.
Stacy Garcia from Suncom says during the summer they get about 12,000 calls every month with Yakima police and fire combined. If it is a hang-up, they call back at least twice to make sure there is no emergency. They can also send an officer to the location or look up past calls from that same number.